Every day in jiu-jitsu, you're looking to get better, sharpen your skills, but could some techniques be putting you in harm's way? After over 2 decades of training jiu-jitsu, I've learned from my coaches and noticed patterns that there are some techniques that are far more dangerous than others. In this video, I'm revealing the 8 most dangerous techniques that often lead to injuries in training. We'll go over how to modify them for safer practice, and when possible, how to protect yourself when they're used against you. And some of the things we're gonna go over in this video are so common, you might be doing them every day without realizing the risk. And if you don't already know me, my name's Sean. I'm a BJJ black belt and a founder of the BJJ education app, Jiu-Jitsu, which if you want to check out, I put a link in the description with some free instructional content.
Number 1, jumping guard.
So the first one we're gonna go over is jumping guard. I remember when I first started jiu-jitsu, you would often see this technique in high-level competition, and it was often taught in class. Specifically, I remember like 20 years ago, this was in instructional videos, and I remember drilling this with training partners. You know, I'd get my grips and then I would jump into them, just jumping directly into closed guard. But over the years, the same horrific accident kept happening over and over again in competitions and in training rooms. And this is when the person jumping guard, either they fall short or they slip off and then they land on the knee, immediately hyperextending it. Not only that, it's not even really safe for the guard jumper either. Like I've heard stories over and over again of the person jumping guard, they fall backwards, the person goes on top of them, and then they immediately get stacked on their neck and the back of their head. And this is the reason why the technique is banned at so many gyms and why I think you shouldn't do it in training. And also I think there's just better alternatives that pull you directly into submissions and sweep attempts. So what I think you should do instead is establish grips and then use techniques where you pull your training partner on top of you and into your guard. This could come in the form of arm and collar drags, but you can also pull them directly into more offensive guards like collar sleeve. For example, here's a safer alternative where you pull them into collar sleeve guard, which you can then transition to closed guard if you prefer.
Number 2, flying submissions.
So it should come as no surprise that flying submissions have many of the same problems as the last one. And don't get me wrong, these things can be really effective in competition. Like you can look at old matches from Edwin Najimi where he was pulling off flying triangles all the time in competition. Then you have guys like today, like Peter Frank, who's pulling off flying arm locks. Like people know it's coming and he gets it over and over again. That being said, these things are high risk, especially variations where you jump or launch into your training partner. Recently, I was talking to a training partner of mine who's a black belt. They wrestled their entire lives. Well, what happened a couple of years ago, they were in training and they were starting from the feet, and then the person they were training with, they jumped for a flying triangle. You know, they didn't have strong grips or anything. Then when they jumped, you know, they landed short. They landed right on top of his knee. This is very similar to that guard jumping situation. The person jumps, they land on the knee, which hyperextends it. This did all sorts of damage to his knee ligaments on top of being really painful. He eventually got surgery to repair it, but he says today his knee just still quite isn't the same. And in my opinion, flying submissions are even more risky for the person going for the technique than like the jumping guard. The reason why is when you go for these flying submissions, like a triangle, you have to launch yourself even higher. And what can happen here is if you slip, then you can land on the back of your head, you can get concussions or neck injuries. So similar to jumping guard, while I admit these techniques can be effective in competition, I think they're not worth the risk and they should be banned by default in training. And there's safer alternatives where you establish grips and then you sit directly into submissions. Also, working on these sitting variations is still useful if you have ambitions to do these flying submissions in competitions. Again, something I wouldn't go for, but you're building skills that are transferable to the flying submission, you know, establishing those grips and then transitioning to the submission.
Number 3, Kani Basami.
Kani Basami or leg scissors is an awesome technique that allows you to take someone down to the ground immediately into a heel hook submission. And what can happen with this one, the person going for the technique, they end up just like falling or jumping their weight directly into the person's knees. And in this case, the force comes laterally into the knees, which can do immediate damage to all sorts of ligaments. And this is something that has happened over and over again throughout the years at tournaments and at gyms. This is the reason why it's banned at Henzo's, it's banned at B Team, and many other gyms and tournaments. So there's there's a proper, safer way to do this that makes it less likely for the person to launch themselves and land directly onto the knees. This involves basing out with your own arm, putting all your weight on top of it before inserting the legs and tripping them over them. In my opinion though, I think it still should just be banned by default in training as the risk is too great. That being said, there are plenty of safe Kani Basami entries that can be used from the guard position.
Number 4. Sasori Gatame.
This move requires intricate leg positioning and can put immense pressure on the opponent's legs and lower back. If executed improperly, it can lead to severe spinal issues. It's known in Japan for its effectiveness in high-level competition, and unfortunately, its risk. Alright, so what I'm talking about is the Sharpshooter. I thought by using its Japanese name, I might get you to take me seriously. So unless you're planning on stepping into a pro wrestling ring, you probably don't need to worry about this one. That being said, while I haven't seen this technique used in training, if you do end up in this position or one similar to it, like the Boston Crab or the Walls of Jericho, it's probably not good for the spine to be stuck in an inverted position with someone's weight sitting on top of you, so I proceed with caution. But let's move on to the real number 4.
Number 4. For real. Tani Otoshi.
So the next one on our list involves takedowns where you lock up with your opponent and then you drop your weight, trying to bring them to the ground. And what can happen here, very similar to Kani Basami and many of the other things, is that when you drop your weight, you can land directly on their knee. In fact, this season in the NFL, they even banned hip drop tackles. The reason why is that these types of tackles showed an outside risk compared to others. And what this is that they would grab the hips while they're tackling and then just drop their weight. And what would happen here is similar to what we're talking about. Either they land directly on the knees or they trip up the legs, resulting in injury that way. Tani Otoshi from Judo is a similar style takedown that has these similar problems where you're grabbing them and then you're dropping your body weight and then tripping them over your leg. And one modification you can make to this is make sure you're behind your opponent when you trip them over your leg, making it less likely for you to land on top of their knee. For example, at Henzo's, we teach a variation where you get behind your opponent, make sure you're facing the same direction you're taking them. You can even drop to a knee first, and then you make sure to trip them or drag them over your leg as you take them to the ground. Not only that, I think with this variation, you're more likely to end up on top, whereas with the traditional Tani Otoshi, there's more opportunities for your opponents to win the scramble and end up on top. And many gyms ban Tani Otoshi for the reason of, people landing on the other person's knee. So I think it's important you're aware of these risks and practice safer variations. Before we move on to the next one, which I think is one of the most dangerous techniques in Jiu-Jitsu, I have an important announcement.
Young people from all over the globe are joining up to fight for the future.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part. I didn't do fucking shit.
Did you know over 90% of viewers aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying this video, please show your support and hit the subscribe button.
Number 5. Rolling back take from turtle.
The rolling back take from turtle is an awesome move if you can pull it off. My first coach, Matt Serra, would teach this move all the time, and he used it in ADCC against Takanori Gomi. However, if done improperly, it can lead to serious damage to the neck and spine, which can even lead to paralyzation to the limbs and extremities. This even led to an injury that led to a jury awarding $46 million in a lawsuit. This isn't the only time I've heard this story though. I was actually talking with someone a few weeks ago who had a similar story where they hurt their neck. Though not as serious, it prevented them from training for over a year, and to this day, their neck is still bothering them. And what can go wrong with this technique? The person in turtle, they don't have their chin tucked, and then the person, they go to roll over and launch their body weight over on top, and then what happens? The neck can get hyperextended with the force of their body weight on top. This can then lead to damage in the bone and the vertebrae in the neck, and then the nerves, and even the spinal cord itself. So there are a few important details to pay attention to apply this technique correctly. The person in turtle, they need to have their chin tucked. Like, you wouldn't do a forward roll with your chin up in the air, you would have it tucked. So it's important to make sure that the chin is in proper position. So to do this properly, you want to use your overhook with a seatbelt grip to put your shoulder on the back of their head and force them to do the roll. So you're not jumping over and launching your body weight over to force them over. You're instead tucking their chin and then rolling them over as you follow. Additionally, as a person on bottom, you want to have your chin tucked so you can roll forward if they do happen to launch themselves forward. forward. And also this helps prevent chokes, just by having your chin tucked, hands inside, you're in a much better defensive posture. There are also much safer ways to take the back from the turtle position. Rather than forcing a forward roll, you can also bring them down to either side. For example, you can bring them back to the side you're on with a traditional method, or you can take them over to the far side. So instead of pulling them towards you, you can put your weight over and away and then re-roll them back over to the back position. So this is actually one of my favorite ways to take the back, going for this far side roll. But one thing to be aware of is that if their palm is down to the mat and then you were to go to roll over, you can end up rolling over their wrist. This is something I've done in training before. And ever since then, I've been very aware of it. Normally people are up here defending the choke, but a good way to prevent this is that you just make sure you control the wrist and pull it to their body as you go and roll over. For our next one, I want you to take a look at this. Can you spot what's dangerous?
Number 6.
So what I think is unnecessarily risky is this arm behind the person where they can't see, sticking out with their weight based on top of it. This effectively puts the arm into a locked position, and it just needs someone rolling nearby to land on top of it to lead to a clean arm break. This is something Matt Serra would always warn us about. After seeing at least one arm break this way, he would always call us out if he saw me or anyone else sitting like that. So to prevent this, sit at the edge of the mat, or better yet, against the wall, because when you're sitting against the wall, you don't have to worry about anyone rolling into you from behind. This is something you should be aware of though whenever you base out on that hand, like when you're rolling. Like for example, when you're doing a hip heist, prop escape, or building up to your feet, when you have that outstretched hand behind you, if there are people rolling behind you doing a scramble, they can land on that arm and then hyperextend it. So you should always just be aware of your surroundings. And this is one of my biggest pet peeves, because some of the dumbest and most senseless injuries I've seen are just people rolling into each other, being completely oblivious of their surroundings. Personally, I take things a step further. I look to roll in the corners or the edges of the mats where this is less likely to happen. And if I notice two grapplers nearby who tend to be completely unaware of their surroundings and scramble all over the place, I just move to somewhere else on the mat.
Number 7. Lockdown sweeps.
I'm mentioning this one because I've seen the same exact injury twice, where the person in lockdown who's getting swept gets their knee torn. And it wasn't when the person on bottom simply applied the lockdown. It's when the person on bottom would build up for the old school style lockdown sweep. And what I saw, the person on top, they would resist the sweep. And the person on bottom, they were quite strong with their legs. And what they would do is that they would extend the lockdown and extend that knee out. And then what would happen, the person in the lockdown, then their knee would get torn rather than them getting swept. So in my opinion, then, to prevent hurting your training partners when going for the sweep, I think rather than focusing on extending that leg, you should instead focus on controlling their far leg with your hands and then building yourself back up into the sweep. And to protect yourself as the person who's getting swept, I think you should just accept the sweep. If you feel like your leg's getting extended and you're in a vulnerable position, roll over, accept the sweep, and look to counterattack from guard.
Number 8. Neck cranks and spine locks.
Unlike injuries to the knees and ligaments, damage to the neck and spine area are really difficult to repair. And in my opinion, I think most jiu-jitsu practitioners after decades of training are going to experience some nerve issues related to the neck and spine. Recently on this channel, I've even talked about some of the damage to my neck after over 20 years of training jiu-jitsu. Some of this is definitely due to wear and tear due to training jiu-jitsu, also sitting with poor posture behind a desk for so long as a software engineer. But honestly, I think one of the primary causes was one particular neck crank during my blue belt days. And what happened was basically I let my ego get in the way. I was in a neck crank. I didn't tap when I should have. Then this immediately led to an injury. And I think the lesson from this is don't let your ego get in the way of training. Don't try to win every roll. Your primary goal is to get better at jiu-jitsu and develop skills. And as a person going for submissions, I think the right mindset to have is treating these finishing positions or breaking positions as positions to maintain. So rather than trying to quickly, break your training partner's arm, try to maintain the position, hold it, leaving them with no choice but to tap. Not only is this safer, but you're actually developing skills and how to maintain these positions, how to apply control, rather than just quickly, explosively blowing by them. And I think both those things, respecting the submission, treating it like a position, especially apply to neck cranks and different spine locks. This is because how vulnerable the area is. Again, we're talking about the spinal cord, which is the main nerves that control the body. so they can lead to serious damage, nerve issues, and again, it's also very difficult to repair. And I think whether you're the person in this submission or the person going for the submission, I think these types of submissions, the breaking position and mechanics are less clear. Like it's very obvious when you have someone's arm hyperextended like in an arm lock, or if you're being strangled, like what that feels like and when to tap. But many times with this type of submission, it's not always clear like when you're in danger. So when you're being put in one of these, you should just tap early. And when you're applying them, you should be very careful and work to maintain that finishing position. So those are my personal 8 most dangerous techniques in jiu-jitsu. Are yours different? Are there any I missed? Please let me know down in the comments. And I'm actually curious because I always pay attention to injury stories in jiu-jitsu. Like it's much easier to learn from other people's mistakes than your own. And in general, if you keep asking these questions and you ask people exactly what happened, like how they got injured, where was your body, what were you trying to do, you can notice patterns and you can know situations to avoid and to be careful of. Personally though, in general, I actually think jiu-jitsu is actually safer than one would think. I mean, think about it. We're trying to like break each other's arms, strangle each other while people are resisting, you're applying maximum effort. I would think injuries would happen more often. And I would say overall, considering the amount of time we spend training, I think accidents are less common than you would think. That being said, injuries do happen in jiu-jitsu, but I also think the ratio of techniques and positions that result in injuries follow that sort of ratio where 80% of the injuries come from like 20% of the techniques and positions. So it's important to be aware of these things to maximize our time spent training and developing skills. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Thank you for watching.